Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to help the channel grow and keep up to date with the latest videos. Hi and welcome to another video by me, Flow Joe. Today we're looking at PowerAutomate flow actions and we're going to be looking at a complete guide to variable actions. What this means is that we will be looking at every variable action out of the box for PowerAutomate. That includes append to array variable, append to string variable, decrement variable, increment variable, and the last and most important two, which are set variable and obviously the most important, initialize variable, and how we actually create a variable. Now don't forget to check out the description because this video is going to be split into sections, so you'll be able to jump to the specific one that you want to understand and learn about and have a live demo on, so you don't have to actually go through all of them, or if you're wanting to learn them all, then sit back, relax and enjoy the video. So firstly we are going to start with initialize variable. Now when you add an initialize variable action, it's going to look like this. It's going to have name, type and value. So the name section is where you simply set the name of your variable. Now this will be referenced later on, so make sure you've got a good name. Then we have the type. So when you select the variable type, it's going to be what the type of variable you're going to be using, right? So if you're using a Boolean variable, it's going to be like a true or a false variable. But there are a lot of different type of variable options on PowerAutomate, and those are the Boolean, which we just talked about. There's the integer, whole numbers, float, decimal numbers, string, which is just your average string variable. Then you've got object, so you can actually create JSON variables, and you've also got an array variable. So let's say we've chosen our Boolean value. Well, then what do? We then need to set the initial value. Now you can choose to set an initial value here, or you can have a blank variable, because the value isn't required at this particular point. You can set the variable later on. So let's jump on to PowerAutomate and actually see the initialize variable in action. Okay, so we're on PowerAutomate. I've got a variable actions guide flow already created. I've got a manual trigger so that we can trigger our flow and see our flow in effect during the demo. If I click on the new step, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type variables. So then you'll see the variable section here, or you'll see a load of variable stuff come in the actions. Now obviously if you select the variable section here, you'll get all of the actions for particular variables. And we're obviously going to be going through all of these, but we're going to be starting with the initialize variable, which we've just been discussing about. So let's select that. And as you can see, we get the name, type and value. So let's set a name. Let's set a name of Flow Joe. And we'll have a type. We can choose a type, and let's say we want a Boolean value. And let's say we want no value at this point. Okay. So if we save that, and then we'll run a test. So let's just run a test. Yep, run float. So what we've done now is we've run our test, we've essentially triggered our flow manually, and we've done an initialize variable action. And what that's done is it's created a flow called a variable called FlowJoe, and it's of type Boolean value. And you can see it's just name of FlowJoe type Boolean value. Nothing else has happened. So what happens if we say, okay, set true? True. The variable of FlowJoe is true. Now if we do a save and test again, what you're going to see then is now the variable contains a name, it contains a type, and it also contains a value from the initial input that we put in, the initial value. So the difference here is that you can create variables that don't have a value. They are just placeholders so that you can populate them during your flow, or you can actually start a variable with a value and change it as the flow goes on. Now we've obviously selected a Boolean value. Let's just change that to an array. So an array is slightly different. We can't just pass a true or false. We can't just pass a string. What we want to do is, if we want to set an initial value for an array, we'll open up a square bracket. We'll then, in our instance, we're going to create a string array. So let's do flow for the first one. And you can see I've got speech mark, flow, and then I've got a close speech mark. Then I do a comma, then another speech mark, Joe, a speech mark, and then I'm going to close that. I could add another one if I wanted to by just simply adding a comma and then doing exactly what I've done for the Joe section, but I'll then close that with a square bracket. So as you can see here, we are now setting an initial value for an array. So if I hit save and test and run our flow, again, we could have started with an empty array, but now we've got an array of two strings, which is flow and Joe. So that is how you use initial variables on PowerAutomate to create a variable that is empty and effectively a placeholder variable, or a variable that has an initial value. So let's now move on to set variable. Okay, so we're on the set variable section. So when you add set variable, you only have two sections that you need to complete. You have a name section, but you're not actually going to put a name in here. You're going to select a name of a previously created variable. So when we was creating our variable in the last section of the video, in the Initialize Variable section, the little drop down arrow on the right of the name is where you'll select, and it will list all of those names for your variables in there. So you'll select a variable, and then you can pass the value that you wish to set that particular variable to. Now, you may be using dynamic data from Dataverse. So let's say you've got a string variable and you're getting a GUID from somewhere, and you want to store it in your flow for some particular reason into a variable. You could then pass that dynamic data into the value. It will be converted to a string and stored as a string variable. Set variable is one of the key actions in the variable actions on PowerAutomate, other than the initialize variable itself. It's a very powerful action, but it does only have two sections. Now those two sections, as we was talking about previously, is the name section where you're just going to select the variable name, and then it also has the set the initial value, so you're just going to put the value that you want. So let's jump onto PowerAutomate and take a look. Okay, so again, we are on PowerAutomate. I've got a variable actions guide flow. I've got a manual trigger. What we're going to do first is we are going to type in variable. Well, I'm just going to type select variable. I'm going to need to initialize a variable. So I'm going to initialize the variable FlowJoe, and I'm going to set this to a string. And I'm going to just leave it at that. So what I can do is I can obviously put the initial value in, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to then come through here, and I'm going to write vary again and select variable, and I'm going to choose set variable. So now you can see I can choose FlowJo, and I'm going to change the value to FlowJo is his name. Very creative, I know, but this is just an example of a string. So we've got a string value of FlowJo. As you can see, when I select this drop down, all of the names of the initialized variables here go to FlowJo, and now we're going to set this variable to be FlowJo. What I'm going to do as an additional step here is I'm going to add compose, and I'm going to put the output of my variable into here, just so we can see it. It's a very easy way of checking what the variable is containing. So let me just run my flow. So we've got our initialized variable, has no value at the moment. Then the set variable has occurred. It's taken the FlowJo variable and set the value to FlowJo is his name. And then the compose has taken an input from the actual variable, not the set variable. It's actually taking it from the variable. And then the output is FlowJo is his name. So as you can see here, we are creating an empty variable, we are setting a variable, and then we are just using a compose to see what the variable is. Obviously we could see what the variable is by the value on the set variable, but it's easy to just pass data into compose so that we can see exactly what it is coming through without any of the additional details that's being passed through on the set variable section. Yeah, so now we're going to go into a more realistic situation. What we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. Let's try vary to get all the variables, and we'll do initialize variable. We'll create a integer and we'll call it age, and we'll set this integer value of 40. We'll add a new step, we'll add a control, and our condition is going to say if age is greater than or equal to 30, so if the person is 30 or over, we're going to do something. So we've created an age of 40 variable, and we've got a condition to check to see if someone is over the age of 30. Well, let's create another variable then. And let's initialize the variable, and we're going to set proof of age required boolean. So we don't know if the proof of age is required yet, so we're not going to set it to false or true. So if the person is at 30 or over, we don't need a proof of age. So what we'll do is we'll write vary again in here. We'll select variable, we'll get the set variable, and then we'll select the proof of age, because that's the one we're changing. We're not changing the actual age itself, we're changing the proof of age. And obviously what you can do to make this a lot clearer is rename these. So we could do age, and then we could rename this to proof of age required. And obviously this is very helpful for you when you're working through your flow to actually understand what variable is what, rather than having to keep opening every single one of them. So now we've got an age variable, we've got a proof of age required, we've got a condition saying if the person is 30 or older, we will go into, if it's 30 or older, we're going to yes. If it's under 30, we're going to no. So is the proof of age required for anyone 30 and older? No. So we'll do false. We'll copy this, but what we'll do is we'll rename this first and say no proof required. We'll copy this and come into our add an action here. Go to my clipboard, no proof required, so let's do that. And then we'll rename this to proof required. And now we'll set this to true. Okay, so when we run through this then, we are creating an age variable of 40. We are then creating a variable of proof of age is required. We don't know, so it's an empty variable at the moment. We're then checking the age is greater than or equal to 30. If it is 30 or older, we're going into yes to say that there is no proof of age required. If not, we're then going into the section of proof required. So let's just run this. So obviously our age was 40 when we created it. We don't know if the proof of age is required yet at this step. Come into our condition. Okay, so the age of 40 is over 30 or equal to 30. So we come into the yes, and we set the no proof required to false. Now that's wrong, right? Because what happens is we want to set the proof of age required to true, but only if they are under. So when we did our test just now, we've gone through and we've come into the true section, the yes section, but we set it to false because we don't need proof of age because they are older than 30. So this is actually correct. It's worked perfectly. But what happens then if we are under the age of 30? So let's change that. Let's go into, okay, this person is only 17 years old. They come into the shop, they want to buy something and they we need to know if we need to get a proof of age from them. So they are 17. We don't know if we need a proof of age for them. The condition has gone, okay, they are not 30 or over, so we need to check for ID. We've gone into the no section because they are not 30 or over. And then you've got a true. We do need to check for proof of age required. So as you can see, set variable is very powerful and can be used in multiple different ways throughout multiple different sections of your flow to change and manipulate the data within a variable that you've set, even outside of conditions on PowerAutomate. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to move from the two big actions, which is Initialize Variable and Set Variable, and we're going to start looking at Increment Variable. Okay, so Increment Variable. Okay, so Increment Variable, very much like the Set Variable, only has two sections. However, it does have the same select variable section. So you're going to essentially select the variable you're going to increment. But what's going to happen in the value section is you're going to set the increment value. Now, if you are a pro dev and you're going through like a loop, a for loop, for example, and you've got an I++, think of that as the increment variable action. Essentially, you could put a 1 value in the value section and just add 1 to the variable every time you run through and apply to each loop, for example. So it's a very simple action. You're just incrementing a value on a particular variable. And there's not really much else to talk about on that. It's better if I just show you. So let's just jump back to PowerAutomate. Okay, so we're back on PowerAutomate. I've obviously got my variable actions guide flow. I've got my manual trigger so we can trigger it. And I'm just going to type vary, select variable again, create an initial variable. We'll call this counter, and we'll set it to integer, and we'll set the initial value of 0. Then what we'll do is we'll use a control. So do until. So what we'll do is we'll run this until our variable of counter is equal to 5. So at the moment what's going to happen is this will just keep running, right? Because nothing is occurring in the do until. We're going to essentially get in an infinite loop until the flow closes down or we stop it manually, because our counter has got a value of 0, and we're going to use a do until loop to run until our counter is equal to 5. But we're looking at the increment variable. So if we go to vary again, select variable and go to increment variable, we're going to select the counter and we're going to increment it by 1. So what's going to happen is it's going to start out as 0. This will run. We're going to add +1. So then this will be 1. So counter is equal to 5. So is 1 equal to 5? No. Okay, run again. Okay, is 2 equal to 5? No. Okay, run again. Is 3 equal to 5? No. Add the 1 again. Is 4 equal to 5? No. Okay, add the 1 again. Is 5 equal to 5? Yes. And then it's going to stop. So we are incrementing each loop our variable of 0 by 1. So let's take this for a test. So we initialized our integer type of variable called counter to 0. We ran, and as you can see here, we incremented it by 1. So what's happened is we've come into our do until, we've added 1. So now we're at 1, right? We've then gone through the next loop, 2, great. We're still incrementing, so we're adding another 1. We've gone through again, added another 1, so we're at 3 at this time. Now we've incremented again, added another 1, we're at 4. Now we go through again, add another 1, we're at 5. And now it's at our logic where we said when our counter is equal to 5, we're going to stop. So because we've incremented our variable by 1 each time, 5 times, we now have a variable of 5. And our logic at the beginning of does our counter equal to 5? If it does, stop the do until loop. Our variable is now at 5 and the do until loop has finished. So we've incremented our variable 5 times by an iteration of 1. And that's how easy it is to use increment variable. So let's take a look at what decrement variable is. So just like increment variable, decrement variable is pretty much the same, but in reverse. We've got the select variable. Just like we did earlier with the counter, we selected the counter of 0 when we entered the value of 1 because we wanted to increment it. Well, here we're just doing it in reverse. So let's say the counter was 5 and we wanted to remove 1. We would just enter a value of 1 in here, and it's going to do a subtract of 1 rather than a plus of 1. We're essentially subtracting with this action. Let's just jump straight back to PowerAutomate and see it in action. Okay, so we are on PowerAutomate again. Again, I've got my variable actions guide flow, my manual trigger. I'm going to simply add a initialize variable. I'm going to call it counter again. I'm going to set it to 5. So we're starting at 5 this time, not starting at 0. And then I'm going to add another do until loop. If our counter is equal to 0, then we're going to stop. So we're currently at 5, and then we're going down until 0. When we get to 0, we will stop this loop. And obviously we are here to look at the decrement variable. So we're going to then select counter, and we're going to decrease by 1. So let's just run this and talk through it. So flow was triggered. We have initialized a variable of 5, our counter variable. And we're saying, okay, does our counter variable equal 0? No, it doesn't. Remove 1. So we were at 5, now we're at 4. Does our counter variable now equal to 0? Does 4 equals to 0? No, it doesn't. Remove another one. So we're using the decrement variable again to remove another one. And we just keep doing that. So then we go down to 3, go down to 2, and then finally when we're on the 5th one, we are then going to remove the final one to hit the 0 mark. So our variable is now at 0 and the do until loop stops. So just like the increment where we're adding, now we're just subtracting. Okay, so let's move on to something slightly more complicated, which is the append to string variable. Okay, so we're on the append to string variable. Again, we've just got the name and the value. So we're going to simply select the variable, and then we are going to pass the string value to be added on to another string. Now, if you think of concatenation, that is essentially what we're doing. Let's say we have a string of flow, and then we enter the value of Joe in the append to string variable. Those are going to be added together, and we're going to end up with flow Joe. So you've got to keep in mind that if you want to append to a string variable, you need to also pass the spaces. So let's jump over to PowerAutomate and look at what we need to do so. Okay, so I'm on PowerAutomate again, and I've got my variable actions guide flow. I've got my manual trigger. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize a variable. I'm going to initialize a variable called name. It's going to be a string type. And I'm going to put the initial variable value of flow. So what I want to do now is I want to essentially add Joe to flow. So I end up with flow Joe. So I'm going to type vary again, get a variable, and look at the one we're talking about, which is the append to string variable. I'm going to select name, and I'm going to pass Joe. So let's save and test that and see what we get. Okay, so our flow is run. We've got a variable initialized of name, string type, and normal value of flow, and then we've appended Joe. But again, we can't see what's happening, right? You can't see anything other than that it has been appended. But what's the actual output? Now we can use our little cheat again from our compose, and we can pass in the output of name. So let's just quickly rerun that again. And now we have flow Joe because we've added Joe onto flow. Essentially what append to string variable does is it concatenates two strings. So like concatenation, you have to be wary of spaces. So how do we add a space between Flo and Joe? Well, it's pretty simple. We just add speech marks, quotation marks around Joe, and then we'll just add a space between the first quotation mark and Joe. So that will then encapsulate the space and it will append that to the string. So if we do this again and run again, we start off with Flo, but this time what we're doing is we're adding space Joe, and now we've got an output of Flo space Joe. And again, you can do that with multiple things. So you can pass a whole sentence is teaching us about variables, and again it's going to take the first space as well. There's not going to be a space at the end because I've closed it down before there's any space, but it's going to pass all of the words and the spaces because I'm using the quotation marks. So I'm essentially passing that whole string, and then we have an output of Flojo is teaching us about variables. So that's how you can use append to string to essentially concatenate onto an already existing string variable. Okay, so let's move on to our last one, which is append to array variable. Now again, as with all of the previous ones, except the initialize, we only have two sections we need to worry about: name and value. Name again is the one where you're going to essentially select the variable, and value this time is going to be the value that you're going to be passing into an array. It's going to be added to an already existing array. Now what we're going to be using is a names example. Let's say we're pulling from multiple different data sources and we want to get an array of names that we want to email out for whatever reason. We can store those in an array, and then we can essentially have a list of names that we want from multiple different resources, and we've essentially we've appended to an already created array variable. Sounds complicated, but let's take a look at how easy it is on PowerAutomate. Okay, so we are on PowerAutomate again. We are on the variable actions guide flow again. And what we're going to do for the final time is we're going to create a variable. So let's again type a vary just to get the variable section up. We're going to initialize a variable. We're going to put names. So we're going to select an array, and now this is very different how we create an array to other sections, and we've obviously gone over this before, but I'm going to go over this again just to reiterate how to do it. So let's say we've got two names. We've got Joe, and then we've used quotation marks, put the first string in, so the first string will be Joe, comma, oops, that's a full stop, comma, space, and then we can add another quotation mark, and let's put Jax. So let's pretend we've gone through Dataverse, we've gathered Joe and Jax out because they haven't logged into their work computer for over 20 days. They've been naughty employees, right? But what we want to do is we want to check another database full of a load of other employees to check to see if they've been naughty too, and we found one. Her name is Meg, and she's not been logged in for 20 days either. So how do we add Meg to the naughty persons list? Well, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to look for the append to array variable. We're going to select names, and as we've got a string variable, we can just type Meg. So what this is going to do is it's going to create an array of Joe and Jax. So we're going to have an array already created under the names. We're going to then target the names array that was created and then inject Meg to the end of the array. But we obviously want to see this occur. So if we write compose and use our little compose cheat to see the output, we can then see what exactly happens. So let's just kick this off. Okay, so we've created an array of Joe and Jax. We've then appended to that array the value of Meg. Again, we can't see what's happened in the append, we just know that it's appended. The ticks worked, we know that something's happened, which essentially has targeted the names variable. But if we come into the compose section, you can see the output of the names array, which is Joe, Jax and Meg. And that is how easy it is to append to an array using the append to array variable action. Now I hope you've enjoyed all of the different actions for variables. Please let me know in the comments if you have any feedback, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching another video by me, Flo Joe. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit that like button or select a video on your screen right now to continue learning more about the Power Platform.